Casey's Cases, The Mysterious New Girl, is a funny graphic novel for young readers. It features the comic adventures of Casey, a fifth-grade detective who loves solving cases, no matter how small. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book and talk about the inspiration behind it. Kay Healy is the author and illustrator of the Casey's Cases graphic novel series, and she joins us to talk about the first book in this series, Casey's Cases, The Mysterious New Girl. Kay, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Tell us about the inspiration behind this new series of books.
So I am trained as a printmaker and a book artist. And for many years, I've been making fine art and doing soft sculpture installations. And my husband is a children's book author and illustrator. His name is Greg Pizzoli. So over his whole career, I've watched his different books be published. I've been sort of the first pair of eyes to look at them. I've seen all of the books of his friends and been to ALA conferences, and I started getting interested in children's books. And about 4 years ago, I was just sketching a silly little character, this sort of cone-shaped girl who had, her best friend and her mom and her dad and her cat. And I started creating a story for her, basically based off of the sketches I was doing. And I actually was hiding my progress on this little project from my husband because I don't know, I was almost like embarrassed to show it to him. I remember when I first showed him the draft I created, I actually turned red. We had been married for 10 years and I was sort of sheepish about it because I know how hard it is to make a kid's book, how hard it is to make a graphic novel, and that it was a huge undertaking. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen with it. For many years, I taught in elementary schools through a community arts center where I'm in Philadelphia. And I worked with grades 1 through 3, so first through third graders, and I was teaching them art. And whenever I was creating my stories, I was always trying to think back to when I was that age and to think of those students and consider what would they find funny? What would they think was interesting or dramatic or stressful? And then I took stories from my own childhood and from my husband's childhood and other stories I had heard and kind of fictionalized them into what became Casey's Cases. So there's Casey's Cases, The Mysterious New Girl, which you have right there. And then there's also, coming out in September, Casey's Cases, Everything is Terrible. That's the sequel. And yeah, she's just a really fun character. She's very easy to write for. I can kind of just sketch her in any scenario and somehow a story just seems to follow.
So for what age group are these books intended?
It says on the internet, at least ages 6 through 10. And I think that's accurate. I think there's, obviously very different reading levels at that stage of life. And what I'm hoping these books do is give a joy of reading, that they are able to allow people, their children, to just sort of have fun with reading. And if maybe you're not as strong of a reader, you can go to the images to really see what's happening. So it sort of guides you that way. And the character, she turns 11 at the beginning of the book. It's her birthday. And I know when I was a kid, I always wanted to read about kids that were a little bit older than me. So I did that on purpose, where she was just a little bit older. But a lot of the scenarios she's in are kind of silly and maybe a little on the younger side. I actually had an interesting conversation with a mom this past weekend. Her daughter just turned 9. And I said, I think your daughter is such a great reader. I bet it might be a little too young for her. And she said, no, she loves books that are just a little more within her reach. She said that she finds them so enjoyable because sometimes if it's too challenging, if she's to go look up a word, if it's too heavy, she's like, I don't want to read it. So I'm hoping that that's what these provide, is just a nice, joyful reading experience for children.
Well, this is the first book in the series we're going to talk about today, and that's Casey's Cases, The Mysterious Girl. So tell us about what's happening in this book.
Right. So it's the mysterious new girl. She wakes up in the morning and realizes it's her birthday. I remember being a kid and sort of you wake up and there's those first few moments where you don't realize it's a special day. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, it's my birthday. This is the best. And she's very excited about her presents, but she has to wait until after during her birthday party that night to open them. So her first mystery, because she's an aspiring detective, is the case of the wrapped presents, because she doesn't know what they are and she's trying to guess what they are. And so this is kind of in the detective genre of books, of which there are many, but her cases are very mundane, very silly, very little. They're not scary or big cases at all. It's sort of like she's losing her hairband. She finds a missing cat. She's wondering what the secret note that her crush wrote in class, what that could be. So they're very, very silly and mundane stories. Sort of like everyday things that I think a lot of kids could relate to. And the whole arc of the book is sort of her meeting this new girl that has moved to town and has come to their school.
I'm talking with Kay Healy about Casey's Cases, The Mysterious New Girl, and our conversation will continue. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. And this new girl is nice as opposed to a Dina who is not.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's very interesting. I have two daughters, and both of them are just really, really interested in Dina. I found out that kids are very captivated by the bad character, by the evil one. And so Dina is this foil to Casey, who's very sweet and bubbly, but a little oblivious. And Dina is sort of snarky. She's snobbish. She's got sort of like the rich girl thing going on. And she was just in there to sort of provide that contrast to Casey's character. And also, I think, to bring up some of the insecurities that you have as a child and as an adult, you know. So yeah, she's definitely an important part of the series. And often she's a lot of kids' favorite character just because she is so mean sometimes.
You know, she's going to say something snarky.
Yeah.
And so she's intelligent in her own way, but she uses that intelligence to insult other people.
Yes, she does. So I guess there is some moralistic stuff in there through her because you know that she's a bad character. But interestingly enough, in the second book, I know we're talking about the first one, but in the second one, there's a lot of drama. And Casey gets in a big fight with almost everyone. Her best friend, Jan, her parents. She gets really irritated at her crush, AJ. And I started making a lot of angry Casey faces for when she's getting in fights. And I started adding some of the features of Dina. And Dina is the only other character that has Casey's characteristic red. No other character has that. And it's never in the backgrounds. Dina has a red scarf just to kind of show that I think there's overlap. There's a little bit of Dina in everybody, right? So these characters are very stark, but really we all encompass all of those kind of qualities to some degree.
One of the funny things about Casey is that sometimes she's clueless, especially for someone who wants to be a detective. In fact, she doesn't seem to know who Nancy Drew is. She doesn't know who Sherlock Holmes is. Well, where some of her classmates do know, but it just kind of struck me as funny. And it depends on how much the kids know when they're reading this. That's something that might sail over their heads, but adults are definitely going to get.
Right. Yes. I like that you picked up on that. she's definitely a clueless detective, which is very different from most detective stories where, Sherlock Holmes is just hyper intelligent, right? And Nancy Drew is just incredibly perfect in every way. And they're very unrealistic characters. Whereas Casey, I think, is a little more relatable. I know when I was a kid, there was so much I just didn't understand. And I always tried to pretend like maybe I did understand, but I was just confused. I was learning. And I think Casey is much more accessible in that way. I love Sherlock Holmes, and I didn't really read much Nancy Drew when I was a kid, but I can appreciate the genre. I think she was one of the early female protagonists in books. So yeah, I think they have their place, but I'm hoping that this is a little more appealing for the rest of us who aren't, geniuses.
I'm curious about the process here in that, as you well know, often with books, there's a separate author and illustrator, but you're both. So do you feel like that's an advantage or sometimes not an advantage?
It was very difficult. They took a long time, especially the second book is the first book is 160 pages and the second one is 208. And so it takes a lot of organization to just keep all of those pages and panels and things in mind, and to remember that there's a pencil cup on the side of the teacher's desk, right? But for me, the stories come from the drawings, and I don't know how to explain it except I see it in my head first. So it would be very difficult for me to hand that over to someone else. And also the writing changes so much once I start actually putting it into panels. I actually talked to a writer who has someone else draw his graphic novels, but he said that once he's got a first draft, he'll actually mark out the panels and do little stick figures. He's not trying to draw it or anything, but he says you need to do that in order to break up the text and say, oh, that needs to be shorter. I can't have a whole paragraph in this little speech bubble. It really changes the way the words go too. So I think it would be really hard for me to come up with just a manuscript that someone else drew. I think it would be easier for me to draw something that someone else had written because, for me, the two processes are so intertwined.
Well, as you mentioned, we have this first book, The Mysterious New Girl, and then the second book coming out in September. So that's 2. Are you anticipating more adventures with Casey's Cases in the future? I
am writing out a whole bunch of scenarios right now. I have a few stories I'm pretty happy with. Like I said, her and her friends are very easy to write for. So I'm hopeful that there will be more. We'll see kind of what happens in the book industry. I think things are a little tenuous, I'll say. But yes, I'm hopeful that there'll be some more Casey's Cases.
This graphic novel for young readers is Casey's Cases, The Mysterious New Girl by Kay Healy. Kay, thank you for talking with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to purchase Casey's Cases, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.